So welcome back to the channel. Today what we're going to do is go through an argument that I've seen, or a presentation that I've put together, showing a connection between what we find in the book of Acts and what we find in Paul's letters. It's just an argument that adds to the reliability, the credibility of the book of Acts and Paul's letters in general, as well as the idea that the traditional understanding of Luke, the companion of Paul, the traveling companion of Paul, as being the author of the book of Luke and the book of Acts, this argument is aimed at adding credibility to that case. So what I want to do is I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation, and then we'll take a look at it. And I just want it at least to be thought-provoking for people who, there's a lot of people who cast doubt, or who have heard others cast doubt on the authorship of the Gospel of Luke or the book of Acts and that kind of thing. And so this is a very persuasive argument for saying that the author of Acts is a traveling companion of Paul. And that's where this eyewitness testimony comes from. It just basically adds some credibility to that idea. So who wrote this gospel? So again, what we're actually going to do is compare the book of Acts to Paul's epistles. And then we're going to see how these particular details in this argument line up. One thing we should understand is that this also bolsters the case that the Gospel of Luke is based on eyewitness testimony as well, because the book of Acts and the book of Luke are written by the same author. So if you compare Luke chapter 1 verses 1 and 2 to Acts chapter 1 verse 1, you can see that Luke and Acts are written by the same guy. And then we can actually compare what we see in Acts to what Paul is writing in his epistles, and see if that has any kind of implications. See, that has a strong indication that he personally traveled with Paul. So this is the key idea, right? The author of Acts is conspicuously familiar with the routes, the purpose, the timing of Paul's travels, in a way that does not suggest literary dependence, like he's getting this information from reading Paul's letters. So details about the funds being raised and transported by Paul and others suggest first-hand knowledge of the details. So we'll see if that's true. I just want to make this case, and I think the presentation should at least, I think, speak for itself. So if you want a better understanding, this map actually helps out with the whole presentation, right? So this map, I think, will come up several times in the presentation. Very basic idea. You have Ephesus here on the right hand side of the map, and then across the sea over in modern day Greece there is a narrow passageway, a little channel, and then right there, that is where the city of Corinth is located. It's in this region called Achaia, which just means Greece. Refers to Greece. And then you have this northern section here called Macedonia. In modern day boundaries on the nation of Greece, there's a place called Northern Macedonia, and the Greeks and the North Macedonians kind of dispute culturally over that section of land, because Greece used to contain that entire section called Macedonia. It used to be all just one kind of big land. And then you have Troas over here on the right, which is mentioned in the book of Acts multiple times as well. And you have Ephesus down here on the right. So a couple things that we'll see. We'll see some information about things related to this map in Paul's letters, and then we'll check out what the same account in Acts and compare them, right? And it's not just the idea that they agree. They agree in a very specific, inconspicuous way. That's what is so persuasive about this argument. But you see here on this dotted line, this is one way that you could get from Ephesus to Corinth. If you're traveling, you can just take a route by sea and get there directly. But the other way to get there is a land journey. So you would depart from Ephesus and go north, and you'd go over through Troas and then take a small sea journey and then land over here on these northern coasts and then come down regions like the Thessalonians and Bereans and things like that. These people were located on the way to Corinth if you're trying to take this land route. So that'll come up. So let's look at the presentation here. So the first point is that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians from Ephesus. So 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 7 through 8, you see that he's going to tarry at Ephesus until Pentecost, right? So that's in 1 Corinthians 16. He is with Aquila and Priscilla in Ephesus. So you see that in 1 Corinthians 16:19. Aquila and Priscilla salute much in the Lord. So they're with Paul, right? Aquila and Priscilla, they are, and Prisca is the shorthand name. They're a big influential couple in the very early church. Paul had already sent Timothy to Greece at the time that he's writing 1 Corinthians. So it says, "For this cause I have sent unto you Timotheus, who is my beloved son and faithful in the Lord, who shall bring you into remembrance of my ways which be in Christ." So in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, we see that Timothy has already been sent by Paul into Greece. So, and he would have sent him through that northern coast. Okay, so now Paul had already sent Timothy to Greece, but we also see that Paul's journey was also going to go through Macedonia. So it says here in 1 Corinthians 16, "Now I will come to you when I shall pass through Macedonia, for I do pass through Macedonia." So he's clarifying the route that he's going to take in order to meet up with them. "And it may be that I will abide yea, and winter with you." You don't do a lot of sailing in the wintertime. So normally if you'd get over there, he may be staying a while with the Corinthians. But we see that he was going to go through Macedonia and take that northern route. So then we also see in 2 Corinthians that he actually completed that journey. So it says, "Furthermore, when I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, and a door was opened unto me of the Lord, I had no rest in my spirit, because I found not Titus, my brother, but taking my leave of them, I went thence into Macedonia." So we see that Paul, he left, he did that northern journey, reached into Troas, didn't find Titus there, and then he continued on his journey through Macedonia, and then came to the Corinthians. So that was completed, and we see that happen. We see that attested to in 2 Corinthians. So again, he went north into Troas, and then up through that route and then into Macedonia before he went to the Corinthians. We also see the reason he's going to the Corinthians to visit is to collect funds. So here in the first verse, 1 Corinthians 16, verse 1, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye." So he's saying, hey, there's a collection going on. The Galatians were also given an order to take a collection, and you should do so as well. You see that also in 2 Corinthians 9, that there was a fundraising going on. And then I can actually move my camera up here so you can see better. But now I go into Jerusalem to minister to the saints. So we see that after they were going to collect the funds, the destination for that money was going to be in Jerusalem. So we find that in Romans 15. So the funds were going to go to Jerusalem, for it have pleased them of Macedonia and Achaia, which is Greece, where the Corinthians are, to make a certain contribution for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. That's the whole purpose of the missionary journey, was to collect funds for Jerusalem. And after he was going to take the funds to Jerusalem, he planned to visit Rome. So you see that in Romans 15. But now, having no more place in these parts, having a great desire these many years to come unto you. But whensoever I take my journey into Spain, I will come to you, for I trust to see you in my journey. So he's speaking to the Romans there. So he planned after Jerusalem and everything happens, he had a desire to go and see the Romans and go into Rome. So these are some ideas that you would get if you read. A lot of them are in 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and Romans. Just some information about Paul's journey, where he was when he was writing the letter, who was with him, the fact that he had already sent Timothy into Macedonia, the fact he was going to take a specific route to get to the Corinthians, and then why is he going? He's collecting money. He's going to take that money to Jerusalem, and then after that, he was going to visit Rome. So you find all these pieces of information from Paul's letters, which in the first century were not circulating as a collection of books like a New Testament. They were circulating individually. So Christians would recite and read from letters if they had copies of them, and Gospels in the first century, but they weren't collected into New Testaments until later. So getting this information from a variety of Paul's letters is not the most easy. It's not the easiest thing to do, to have access to, and then to put them in a chronology that makes sense of all the details you find in the letters. That's not an easy task to do. So we'll see what Acts does with the same information, right? So we'll start out here. Paul was in Ephesus in Acts chapter 19, verse 1. So we see, so just to jump ahead a little bit, if you just say, Paul writes 1 Corinthians in Acts chapter 19, verse 22, right after sending Timothy over to the Corinthians. That's when he writes 1 Corinthians. All of these pieces, all of these details about where they're going, when, the route that they're going to take, who's with them, why he's going, all that stuff fits in with the book of Acts perfectly. But you'll notice that the author doesn't draw any attention to what that correspondence is with Paul's letters whatsoever. He doesn't draw attention to that. It just lines up with exactly what we find in Paul's letters. So Paul was in Ephesus. You see that in 19 verse 1. He's with Aquila and Priscilla in Ephesus. So you see that in chapter 18, that he sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Caesarea, he came into Ephesus and left them there. So Aquila and Priscilla are in Ephesus, and they're with him in chapter 19. He had already sent Timothy to Greece through Macedonia. So he sent into Macedonia 2 of them that ministered unto him, Timotheus and Erastus. But he himself stayed in Asia for a season. That's in 1922. That's the point that we can say that Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. His journey was going to go through Macedonia. So after these things were ended, Paul proposed in spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I've been there, I must also see Rome. So that's kind of also jumping ahead to some other points. But that he went to go through Macedonia. And in this verse, Luke is actually telling you what he proposed in his spirit. We're telling the mindset, the thought process of Paul. So if Luke is a traveling companion of Paul, it makes perfect sense that he would know that he had basically made a plan. He was going to go through Macedonia into Greece, and then go into Jerusalem, and then after that go see Rome. We see Paul completed the journey. You see that he did that and departed for to go into Macedonia, and when he had gone over those parts, he had given them much exhortation. He came into Greece. See that in Acts chapter 20, verse 1 through 2. Then you see in Acts 24 that the reason for going there in the first place was to collect funds from the Corinthians. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings. And what were those funds to be? There were alms and offerings to go to Jerusalem. So the funds were going to go to Jerusalem. So again, Acts 19:21. And then after that, he plans on visiting Rome. You see that in the same verse. So these details you find in Paul's letters, you also find them in Acts in a very inconspicuous, non-specific way. And you could probably read the book of Acts multiple times without thinking to posit that that's where he wrote 1 Corinthians. But when you do, all of these details line up. And so that for that reason, we can say the author of Acts accurately delivered facts found in Paul's letters in a way that does not suggest literary dependence. He's not using these details as a citation, where he's saying, "Hey, I got all these details that you find in 1 Corinthians." He's just telling a narrative of what was happening, in some cases in different order, and they all are consistent with what we find in Paul's epistles. And again, in the first century, there was no such thing as a New Testament that you could just read and then piece it together. Which ones are written first? When did Paul write this or that? And then concoct a story using those details to make something that makes sense. Paul's letters would have been circulating still at that point as individual letters. It wouldn't be very easy to do this kind of thing. And he didn't present it in a straightforward chronology, neither did Paul. And it's not obvious which of Paul's letters are written first. So, it's only really after study and correlation with other letters and other information that you find that you can kind of piece together when these books were written, what years, and that kind of thing. So again, he didn't draw attention to that correspondence, and he's not citing these details to make his account seem more legitimate. He's just stating facts. So overall, the presence of these details does not correspond well with the idea that Acts is a forged document where someone is telling a narrative, making something up as they go. There's another argument on a similar vein. It's not as detailed, but there is something that you find that the author mentions and gets consistent with Paul's writings, but doesn't draw attention to it, right? And that is this group of people who is accompanying Paul. There's a list of people, list of believers, and it names where their cities are, right? So there's this large group of people traveling with Paul, and then Acts lists them and tells you where these people are from. And they're from different places where you have different congregations. But again, the author does not explain the significance of the origin locations of these people. So it's actually very common if you read the New Testament, you find these different people in the New Testament who you have James, the son of Zebedee, or you'll have Simon Peter, or you have Simon, the son of this person, or these kinds of things. Whenever you have the son of this person, or Jesus of Nazareth, that kind of thing, when you have these qualifiers of either where someone's from or who their father is, typically, it's when there's a very popular name and you're trying to distinguish and identify a specific person, right? In this case, you have Sopater, Berea, Aristarchus, and Seguinus of Thessalonians, which it doesn't say Thessalonica, it says Thessalonians. You have Gaius of Derbe, and then you also kind of parenthetically have and Timotheus. And it's interesting because Gaius of Derbe would be from a congregation in Derbe, whereas Timothy is from Derbe, so he's grouped together with Gaius, but he's not Gaius and Timothy of Derbe. It's just Gaius of Derbe and Timotheus. Then it says Tychicus and Trophimus of Asia Minor. I don't know if that could be Galatia or not. I'm not sure. But so you've got these people, and it tells you what congregation or what city or group that they're from, right? And they're accompanying on the journey. Something that you find and this is just a map. You see here, Berea and Thessalonica are both on this North Macedonian coast. Achaia is down here with Corinth. Derbe is over in the west, or the east, sorry, and then you got Asia Minor, which is more of a big region. But there is something that you find in 1 Corinthians 16, 1 through 4. Why would you have this group of people, and why would you name them and list where they're from? In 1 Corinthians 16, 1 through 4, you'll see that Paul is insistent on there being trustworthiness with respect to money. So when he's doing this fundraising journey, he doesn't want to basically go to Corinth, collect the money, and then just leave. Because someone could, who knows what people would think if you go to the church and then you just leave with their money. That money could go anywhere, right? You don't really know where that money is going. But if you send a representative, so if you read the first 4 verses of chapter 16, you'll see that he says, if you want to send some representative to come along with me on this missionary journey, and I don't even have to go, but if you want me to, I'll go myself as well on the journey. But Paul is saying, I don't even have to be on the journey with the money. I just want to raise the money and let it get to where it needs to. And if you want to send a representative, that would be, that's what his suggestion is. And so that basically seems to be Paul's practice, is going on a fundraising journey along with a representative from each of the churches that is getting money, so that you can be sure that the money reaches the destination that it needs to, and be able to basically report back to their congregations that it went where it needed to. So the author, again, makes no effort to draw attention to the fact that he's listing these people out of where they're from, but it's consistent with what we see in 1 Corinthians 16 as a means of verifying that the money goes where it needs to. So that's just another undesigned coincidence. So the presence of, and these are called undesigned coincidences because they're a kind of a thing where you have this consistency between the 2 letters, but it's really inconspicuous, and there's no attention drawn to it that a forger would take advantage of. If he's trying to add credibility to his letter, he's not doing it in a way that's conspicuous. So that's what an undesigned coincidence really is. There's no effort on the part of the author to draw attention to the correlation between his book and Paul's letters, and that fact adds credibility actually to both witnesses, because now you have 2 independent witnesses to the same event, told in their own way, without evidence that one is dependent on the other for their testimony. So it kind of adds actually to the credibility of Paul and to the book of Acts. The strong evidence that the events told in Acts are based on genuine eyewitness testimony. So you couple that with the fact that in the book of Acts, you have several passages that use words like we and us, right? That's why the traditional account says that it's a traveling companion of Paul, is because you have places in Acts where it says we did this when we arrived or when something happened to us. That just sort of adds impact and credibility to the idea that this really is a traveling companion of Paul, which is what all of the earliest sources which give attestation to Luke and Acts, they all say that Luke wrote it and that Luke is a traveling companion of Paul. And so that's actually just perfectly consistent with the traditional account. It also adds credibility to the places where Paul's intentions are actually known. So if this is actually based on eyewitness testimony, and you're telling about what Paul was thinking in his heart or what he had determined to do, that kind of intimate knowledge of Paul's desires and his intentions, really only makes sense if the person knows Paul or was there in the moment with Paul, right? So one of those 2. And so just kind of concluding takeaways, in my opinion, especially that first argument, is too specific and too detailed for me to imagine a forger doing something like that. In my mind, it undermines the idea that totally the Acts is written by some forger concocting a story. in my opinion, is pretty persuasive that the simplest possibilities are the traditional attestation of Luke, or that Luke was written by another author who remains unnamed but relies on genuine eyewitness testimony. So that's I just take the Lucan account. The reason I do that is because there's no competing traditions historically. It's not like people in the early days of Christianity were debating who wrote Luke Acts. Everyone is all in agreement that Luke is the author, and the data is consistent with that tradition. And then we have a way to undermine the idea that it was forged in the name of Luke, or in the name of an eyewitness. It just looks like it's genuine eyewitness testimony that Luke wrote. So that basically concludes the presentation. I hope someone gets something out of this. I particularly find that first argument to be persuasive enough that I don't think any of the skeptical arguments about the authorship of Luke go through. I can't imagine myself insisting that this was a forgery or something like that in the face of what we see in Luke correlating so well with 1 Corinthians and Romans and 2 Corinthians there. So anyway, I hope you got something out of that. This is a quick video. Well, it's 27 minutes, but there's going to be more content, I think, like this. So let me know what you think in the comments. And I do appreciate your attention. Like, subscribe if you like this kind of thing. And I will talk to you guys in the next video. So God bless.